The high deductible health plans from the insurance exchanges and insurance companies' cost cuttings initiatives is really hitting patients hard now. So many of them simply get lost in the confusion and they just can't pay or even understand what their patient responsibility or what their costs are. Whether you're starting a new practice, looking to get your patient accounts receivable under control, trying to improve cash flow, or build better relationships with patients, I'm going to show you the tactics that are going to help you and your patients pay their high deductibles up front and stay loyal to your practice while doing it. So what we're going to cover today is the exact method that I've used successfully on thousands of patients with very high deductible health plans. I'm going to show you the easy way to calculate patient costs before the visit, and I'm going to show you how to handle when a patient won't or can't pay for their costs. All right, I've got 3 quick questions for you. Number 1, are you worried you won't get paid for a patient visit because of their deductible? Number 2, do you feel like a hamster on a wheel working just to get patients in and out the door? And 3, do you feel like your job has been reduced to volume quotas instead of care first, which is how you were trained to practice? What if you could get paid for all the work you do without fighting with insurance companies and have your patients thank you for it? If this sounds like you, the real problem is that you don't have a proven process for handling patients with high deductibles. When you implement the process that I'm about to show you, you're going to be able to keep more of the money that you earn, you're going to stop paying commissions to billing companies and collection agencies, and you're going to actually improve patient loyalty. A little bit about me. After over 10 years of working with physicians and residents and more than 50,000 patient experiences, and also owning a fast-growth primary care practice, I've designed a comprehensive system that helps you thrive in private practice without the fear of third-party influences like insurance companies or government intervention. All right, let's get into the training. We're going to dive deep, so just stick with me, but we're going to cover the whole system, and by the end, you're going to be glad you stayed, and you're really going to find a way to impact your practice in a simple and effective way. Most patients will come in, and your front office staff will have had at least some process in place for eligibility and benefits verification for that patient. Oftentimes, even if we do find that the patient does have a high deductible health plan, or they're coming in for a procedure that may not be covered, or even if they're out of network, they don't know what those costs are going to be, and your front office is often unprepared to communicate with them. That starts off the interaction on the wrong foot because the patients are confused and frustrated because they just weren't expecting to pay something outside of their copay. Often, because you don't want to sacrifice the visit, then your front office or registration staff will just default to saying, okay, well, that's fine. We can bill you out later after the visit. Oftentimes, they're not even sure what the visit type is going to be, so they can use that as an excuse to not be able to communicate with the patient what that cost is going to be. And of course, that leaves the physicians and the practice owners frustrated ultimately because what's happening is you get more and more money going into your accounts receivable over time that you're just not going to be able to collect on. So the reality is that patients are simply unprepared to make those high deductible payments up front. The result of that, in general, what's happening now is there's 3 main things that patients are starting to do. They're learning to urgent care hop in order to avoid those high costs. They're willing to take on the higher copayment, but ultimately then they're not following up with their primary care physicians, and the coordinated care aspect of what should be happening with their primary physicians is just falling away. Next is they're waiting until they need emergency care. They're just delaying care altogether. This is definitely contributing to the high costs, which are kind of swirling this problem that we're having of how to get costs under control. If we're not educating the patients on what their costs are and how to reduce those costs by being proactive, then they just avoid their visits altogether and wait until it's an emergency to get care, in which case we know costs 3 times more. Finally, they're actually learning how to seek out offices or practices that are disorganized and don't ask to collect up front. So if you have a policy in place where you're not consistently collecting money and communicating that with the patient up front, then for them, they just know when they get that bill later on, it's just going to be something that adds in that they can't pay. And on average, most practices have $215,000 per year that fall under this category that they actually won't be able to collect on. So when we look at what your biggest problem with getting patients to pay is, I think you'll be surprised to see it's not that they won't do it. I think most importantly, it's because they feel that they're not being helped with that process. So in this survey, you can see in a questionnaire we did, do you think your doctor should discuss the costs of recommended treatments with you ahead of time, or don't you think that's necessary? So an overwhelming majority wishes that they would have some discussion, that their doctor's offices would let them know what the costs were going to be. That allows them to better plan for that care and build a better relationship with the practice. So once we've established this, then the next question is, will your patients pay their high deductibles upfront if they know what they're going to be? Now here's where we get into the system that I've used on thousands of patients in multiple practices and dozens of clients that have really helped them solve the problem of collecting more of that money that they won't see if they're not doing it up front, and communicating with the patient in a clearer and a better way. So I generated this system that I basically learned from dealing with over 1,000 awkward conversations with patients about money, and I call it the FETCH system. So overall, the FETCH system has 3 parts. Part 1 is learn how to be firm yet fair with your patients in the communication of their costs. 2, show empathy and understanding the challenge that they're facing as their costs get higher and higher. Number 3 is collecting half of that visit up front, which allows you to recoup more of your costs at the time of visit and build a system for helping the patient to pay off the remainder over time. So here's how it works. Step number 1 is to create a clear financial policy in your practice so that you're delivering that as part of your new patient packet. Number 2 is pre-coding the patient visit. This allows us to understand what the potential estimated cost of that visit is going to be, and understand what the visit type is so that your front office staff can communicate, here's the service that you're coming in for based on your chief complaint, and ultimately here's what the cost is going to be at the end of this visit. Number 3 is estimating the total visit cost. So this is where, when we have an accurate system for determining eligibility and benefits verification with patients that have these high deductible health plans, you'll know how much is remaining on their deductibles and whether or not that's going to be applied to that particular visit. Number 4 is collecting half of that amount due. So once you've estimated that total cost, usually it's going to be more than they've expected to pay. Hopefully you're communicating that beforehand. We recommend at least 3 days beforehand. Once you know that that full amount is going to be due, then you can work with them by offering them a discount of collecting half of that amount due at the time of visit. And then finally, setting up a payment plan so that you can have an easy follow-up for them to get the remainder, where it still avoids sending them some big balance statement at the end that just keeps piling up and they never pay until it's too late, and then they have to go to collections. So I'm going to show you how to create a 5-step system for a simple payment plan that works for every patient. Okay, let's start. So number 1, clear financial policies. So this is a great example that a practice used where they decided that they would create a new policy just stating that they would collect $100 up front for every patient that has high deductible plan, because they know what their out-of-pocket costs are going to be. They know that if on taking a flat level of $100 up front, A, makes it easier to communicate with the patients, and B, they know that they're actually covering the cost of that visit so that they're not in the hole at the end of the visit and they're chasing more and more patients to make up for the shortfall. And this example works great because they clearly define that, they educate about what your deductible is, and they talk about why they choose to collect it at the time of visit. Next, pre-coding the patient visit. So here I'm going to show you how simple this is. So most front office staff complain that how am I supposed to estimate the visit cost if I don't know what the visit type is going to be? So here's where you can use a simple worksheet, and I'm going to include this worksheet at the end for everybody who stays till the end. I'm going to give you the full toolkit that you can use to implement this in your practice right away. So the worksheet breakdown starts with your common procedure code or your visit code. Let's start off with a 99204 as a simple example. Now, we're going to get the expected reimbursement amount as 164, and for each CPT code or for each visit code, you're going to create a reference document for your front desk or your registration staff. So where are we getting this number? So ultimately, if we look at that one visit code, and we're not going to worry about adding service level codes yet, that's something that you can do. And again, the tool that I give you where it's going to help you do that is I'm using the Medicare fee schedule as your baseline. Now you can go to Medicare website and look at the CPT code lookup tool. And it's a great resource because it's going to allow you to punch in the specific codes for your specific specialty and then see what the expected reimbursement is. Now, since all payers still use this as their baseline, even though you may be working with commercial payers and their reimbursement amount could be higher or lower than this, 164 gives you that perfect estimate to use because you know that that's giving you a standard amount. So next, once we've pre-coded that visit and then calculated the total, in the previous example, we just have the one visit code for the 99204, so that's going to be a new patient visit at a high complexity. So now we're going to go through and take a look at what the individual costs will be for that visit. So first thing for the patient responsibility is going to be their copayment. And the copayment amount, you want to break that out separately because when you do the accounting, and when you get the EOB back from your insurance company, it's going to list out patient responsibility and copayment as two separate line items. So first, you calculate the $25. Next, we're going to put in the 139 because we're going to get that number from the 164, and then we're reducing the $25 out of that. That gives us the expected allowed amount of 139. Now, again, this is exactly what the EOB looks like when you get it back after you submit your claim. So here, the first part of this calculation is looking at breaking out the copayment and the expected allowed amount into two separate items. So here again, you can see that 164 minus the 25 gives us the 139 allowed reimbursement. This is how it's going to be calculated on the claim report that you're going to get back from the insurance company. Next, once we have that calculation done, now we're going to see that their copayment is due for $25. We know that the allowed amount of 139 is going to be due because they haven't met their deductible, which we determined in their benefits and eligibility verification. So from here, we know that the total amount due for that visit is going to be 164. So ultimately here, what we want to do is we want to do the math to collect half of that at the time of visit. So step one in that calculation is the 139 divided by 2 gives us $69, right? So that's how we're collecting half of the deductible. Step 2 then is adding the copayment amount there and getting us the total amount due for the time of visit. Again, it seems like complex math, but really it's just two simple steps. You can train your staff to do it, and I'm going to give you the worksheets which do it for you. Next, now that we know what our full amount is going to be, we know that we're looking to collect half. Now we can set up a payment plan for that patient for the remainders. And so, for example, here, we're getting them to agree to a payment plan of 3 more monthly payments of just $24 with a credit card on file, which they're going to be likely to do because you're offering the opportunity for them to still maintain that visit, pay towards their deductible amount, which that patients understand, and then pay off the remaining balance without ever getting a statement or a balance invoice in the mail. Okay, so let's talk about collecting half. So this is something that a lot of practices don't think to do, and I call it the magic formula that keeps you in the black. And here's why. On average, the internal cost of a patient visit for an in-office setting is about $85. Now, over time, as you understand different reimbursement rates, you need to track and you need to know your numbers to understand if you are actually making money on that visit per visit. So oftentimes the average reimbursement could be anywhere from $130 to $200 depending on the service and the visit type. So it's important to understand what your internal visit cost is, and that's a big part of one of the things that we do is we'll come in and help you take a look at determining that cost. So first, when we go through and try to understand how to make certain decisions about this process, number one is, does the patient have eligible coverage for your scheduled visit? And I call this the collection decision tree, because this right here is the key to training your front office staff and understanding how to go through the steps of determining what their eligibility verification is going to be, determining what their remaining deductible amount is, and finally understanding how to communicate what they want to collect. First, does the patient have eligible coverage for the scheduled visit? Yes. And this really is about whether they're in network or out of network as a patient. If not, then you want to make sure you're communicating with that patient at least 3 days beforehand if they're out of network, that there's going to be potential costs, or if they're self-pay. If yes, if they are in network with your office, with your providers, then the next question is, does that patient have a remaining deductible? And so from here, we do the calculation that shows, yes, they have a remaining deductible, in which case you're going to go back to the worksheet, you're going to add in the copayment, the deductible, and a coinsurance, if that's listed as part of their plan, to the total amount due. If not, then you're just adding that copayment and the coinsurance, because those two items they're still responsible for, even if they fulfilled their deductible amounts. So you're still using the same process, but here you're just doing the math a little bit differently. So next we're going to get into how to use that worksheet to calculate the amount due. And here I break this into 3 categories. If the total amount due based on the worksheet is somewhere between $10 and $175, this is an opportunity for you to collect the full amount due at that time of visit. Because often this is something that the patients can do financially. 2, if the total amount due falls somewhere between $175 and $300, this is a good opportunity to communicate collecting half of the amount due at the time of visit and then putting the remainder on the payment plan. Finally, if you're adding in more expensive procedures and you know that ahead of time, again, then you can even look at creating an entire payment plan for the full amount if it gets to a higher amount. You still need to collect the copay. You can come up with a predetermined amount that's not exactly half, that's less than half, but that's still covering your costs, because that's my recommendation. And then you can let the patient know that you understand. OBGYNs do this really, really well because they have global pricing when they have a new patient come in for a full pregnancy treatment. Okay, so next we're going to talk about creating a payment plan that really works. So here's my 5 keys to creating a perfect payment plan. Number 1 is you're going to set up the payment plan before the patient leaves the office. This is key. You should have a template prepared, and you can have a payment plan letter that determines the amount of monthly payment for them. And again, I have a template for this that will be part of the toolkit that you can use. And that way you're going to be clear and get that verbal agreement for them while they're there in the office. Now, what you should also do is collect that initial payment from the patient as they're agreeing to that payment plan. So they're literally signing off on the document, agreeing that, yes, I'm going to pay X number of dollars today, and I agree to pay the remainder off in the next 3 months, 6 months, and whatever's manageable for them too. Don't be afraid to ask them what they can handle, because you're going to be more likely to collect on that amount It still saves you the costs of having to chase down a denied claim or send out multiple balance statements, and all the printing and mailing that goes to that. So next, you want to provide a letter to that patient to sign for the verification, and then at that point, you want to keep a card on file. So in part of your financial policies, if you just state, we keep card on file for small balance payments, then they know they're not going to be surprised with a large payment coming out of their account, but they understand that this is something that's going to come out of their account from their bank card month over month until they meet the requirement of the full payment. And then finally, you want to add this to a calendar for follow-ups. So if you're using some type of scheduling software that has notification in it, then this is perfect because you want to be able to communicate to the patient that their cost or the payment is coming due before you even run the card. So you can do that via email, and I'll have some recommendations in the toolkit for options that work really, really well for this as well. But it's crucial to keep communicating with the patient so that they stay on top of those payments, even if you have the card on file. Okay, so finally, the next biggest obstacle in making this system work really is the frustration of the insurance eligibility and benefits verification. Every insurance company is different. I know what it's like to have to log on to dozens of portals to get in and understand what the actual responsibility is for that patient, depending on where they are. Now I'm going to show you a way to simplify this process, and then again I'm going to recommend some resources even further to help consolidate it. But let's start with the calculation. Really, you only need 3 key pieces to accurately estimate and verify what the patient's responsibility is going to be. A is simply the annual deductible, which is part of their plan. B is what's the amount remaining on that deductible. And then C, what's their ultimate maximum amounts? Now this is where, this should be 5 to 10 times more than what their remaining amount is, depending on the time of year. But these 3 pieces of information tell us everything we need to know if the total visit cost is going to be below or above what the amount remaining is. And really, that's really all you're trying to do. So once we've established that, the whole question is, what if the patient gets frustrated and they won't pay, or they can't pay at the time of visit? So this is where training your staff to communicate well with the patients and applying that 3-step system of being firm and fair, showing empathy, and then collecting half really comes into play. So in this example, most patients who commonly, let's say you're just implementing this in your practice, most patients aren't used to paying above and beyond just their copay. And so they're going to respond with saying, I've never had to pay before, can't you just bill me after I get home? So here's where you can respond with a statement that says we've begun collecting the deductible payments up front. This allows you to learn about your estimated costs and allows you to make a payment now that will go towards your bill on the back end. And then you give them the option to move forward and pay on that. So this is just one scenario. I have about a dozen more of these scripts that I'm going to go ahead and share with you as part of that toolkit at the end. And those are great tools to do some role playing with your front office so that they know how to handle challenging situations when patients come in that are frustrated about paying. So if you follow these steps, and we've covered them all in sequence, you're going to find that you're going to be able to have a better relationship with your patients, and ultimately it's something that you can control inside what's happening now, where payers are paying less and less. You're having to feel the pressure to squeeze in more patients to make up the shortfall for denied claims, and ultimately for the reduction in overall payments that's happening with commercial payers, and we're seeing that in some of the state programs as well. All right, guys.